What we're looking at here is a fire that gutted one of Poland's biggest shopping malls, a blaze the Polish government believes Russian saboteurs probably started. If confirmed, the fire would be just one in a long line of Russian sabotage attacks in Europe in recent years, which experts say amounts to a shadow war being waged by Moscow. In the last 12 months alone, Kremlin agents are thought to have set off explosions, plotted murders, severed undersea cables, and jammed aircraft navigation across the continent. So, what exactly has Russia been up to? Why has it been carrying out the attacks? And perhaps most importantly, are they working? We're going to examine the tapes, give you the big picture, and speak to an expert to find out. Here's Europe, the crossroads of the world, a cultural melting pot that has a habit of boiling over and is no stranger to conflict. For the last 3 years, the war dividing Europe has been taking place in Ukraine. On the one side is Russia. The country is huge, has a large population, a multi-trillion-dollar economy, and, at least until the war started, a military to dwarf all others. But its list of European allies is short. These countries cannot provide Moscow with much help to win the war. On the other side is Ukraine. It is one of Europe's largest countries geographically, but with a much smaller population, economy, and military than its eastern neighbor. Its list of friends, however, is much longer, encompassing all of the richest and most powerful countries on the continent aside from Russia itself. These countries have been pumping weapons and money into Ukraine since the first day of the war. Without their help, Ukraine would be in danger of losing. Breaking up this alliance is therefore a key goal of Russia's, which is where the shadow war comes in. According to researchers at US think tank CSIS, here's every suspected or confirmed Russian sabotage attack that took place in Europe between 2022, when the Ukraine war started, and March of 2025. That's a lot of attacks, 49 to be specific, and the trend is very much upwards. CSIS logged just 3 attacks during the first year of the war, 12 the following year, and then a whopping 34 in 2024. And this almost certainly isn't all of them. This list only includes those disclosed publicly and doesn't include cyber attacks unless they caused physical damage, which most of them don't. The fire we just witnessed took place here, in Warsaw, the capital of Poland. Poland is a key ally of Ukraine. It has donated more tanks than anyone else, taken in millions of refugees, and it is through Poland that all other military aid to Kiev passes. It is perhaps no surprise, then, to learn that it was also one of the most targeted nations when it came to sabotage attacks. Researchers logged 10 of them, which ranged from fires to assassination plots, hack attacks, and even weaponized migrants. We're not going to go through all of them here, but we will pick out a few that help explain trends the researchers identified elsewhere. Aside from the shopping center fire in Warsaw, another blaze that's worth examining happened at a DHL warehouse in Jabłonów, just outside the capital. The warehouse was set alight and burned for 2 hours because of an electric back massager that had been rigged to explode and stuffed with magnesium, which burns very hot and is very difficult to put out. The fire itself was nowhere near as dramatic as the shopping mall, but investigators believe it was only a test run. The real target were airplanes bound for the US and Canada. Prosecutors say agents from Russia's GRU, the intelligence branch of the military, intended to mail these massagers across the Atlantic before setting them alight mid-flight. And Jabłonów was not the only warehouse where a practice run took place. Almost identical fires also broke out in Birmingham in the UK and in Leipzig in Germany. 3 things are worth noting here. First, the involvement of the GRU. This is Russia's go-to agency for carrying out covert missions overseas, and they are thought to be behind the vast majority of these sabotage attacks, even if they sometimes recruited locals to actually carry them out. You may recognize the GRU from their earlier work. The attempted poisoning of Sergei and Yulia Skripal in the UK in 2018, and a program that paid Afghan militants to attack US soldiers that ran from 2016 until America withdrew from the country in 2021. Second is the method: incendiary devices or explosives. CSIS say this is Russia's favorite method of sabotage, accounting for over a third of the attacks they logged. Aside from the shopping center and the DHL warehouse we've just seen, major fires also broke out at a warehouse belonging to Deal Group here in Berlin. They're an arms maker whose weapons are used in Ukraine, as are BAE Systems, which saw a fire at one of their sites in the UK, and MCO, which saw explosions at 2 ammunition storage facilities in Bulgaria. Third is the target, transportation. This was also a favourite for the GRU, accounting for around a fifth of the attacks, though sometimes via different methods. For example, Poland's railways, the main way that military aid to Ukraine crosses the border, were also hit. This time, hackers used cheap radio transmitters to send signals to Polish trains that caused them to slam on their emergency brakes. Airplanes were also hit using GPS jammers, which interfered with their communications and caused flights to veer off course. Russia has made widespread use of such jammers to interfere with military communications in Ukraine, and attacks on civilian aircraft occurred in the same vicinity: Estonia, Finland, Lithuania, Norway, and Poland. Moscow claims no responsibility for these attacks, though in some cases it isn't hard to guess who's behind them. In the case of the Polish trains, the signal that disabled them was broadcast alongside snippets of the Russian national anthem. But in other cases, the attacks are much harder to attribute, casting a pall of suspicion over virtually any fire or malfunction of critical infrastructure in Europe. If we go back to the tapes, we can see how these mind games work. Here's a fire that broke out at an electrical substation which serves London's Heathrow Airport in March 2025, shutting the airport down. Britain said it has found no evidence of Russian involvement, but experts warn the blaze bore all the hallmarks of sabotage. Russian Security Council head Dmitry Medvedev even mocked the UK Prime Minister over the attack, saying he looked forward to taking the blame. Then there's the recent power outages in Spain and Portugal, which plunged the countries into darkness for several days. The cause is under investigation, and while no clear-cut evidence of Russian involvement has been found so far, questions were inevitably asked. There's also 3 other tactics that researchers picked up on which are worth discussing. The first is assassination plots. The most serious of these involved plans to attack President Zelensky at an airport in Poland, Rzeszów, that is the nerve center for the war in Ukraine. GRU agents are thought to have recruited a local man to gather intelligence on the airport for a later attempt on Zelensky's life, though the plot was exposed and the man arrested. Another targeted Armin Papager, the CEO of German arms maker Rheinmetall, which has been a vital supplier of artillery shells to Ukraine. Though Papager is the only known target, NATO said other plots existed and were also foiled. One plot which succeeded was the killing of Maxim Kuzminov, a Russian helicopter pilot who defected to Ukraine in 2023 along with his aircraft and a stash of secret documents. Kuzminov was shot 6 times in the parking garage of an apartment where he was living in Spain, just here, and then run over with a car. The assassins clearly meant to send a message because they left behind shell casings from a 9mm Makarov bullet, standard issue ammunition for the Soviet Union and Russia. Then there's weaponized migrants. This is a novel tactic that was first deployed by Russia and Belarus back in 2021, months before the Ukraine war started. Moscow and Minsk lured migrants from the Middle East and North Africa to their territory, then pushed them across the border into Poland and the Baltics, attempting to manufacture a crisis like the one in the Mediterranean. The target countries responded by building border defenses and forcing the migrants back. That caused attempted crossings to decrease, but never back to pre-crisis levels. In 2024, while the war was in full swing, attempted crossings began rising again, and a new country, Finland, was added to the target list. While this tactic is relatively rare, it is unique and shows just how far Russia and its allies are prepared to go in their shadow war against Europe. Finally, there's another novel tactic that is far more common: undersea cable sabotage. This tactic is novel because, until relatively recently, undersea cables were not a key part of national infrastructure. But today, they carry 95% of internet traffic required for daily life to function, including financial trades worth $10 trillion every single day. This map shows just how many there are in Europe alone. Russia's sabotage campaign against these cables has focused up here, in the Baltics, where at least 9 such attacks were logged. The method is basic but effective. Russia employs a shadow fleet of cargo ships which are illicitly transporting its sanctioned oil to sever the cables. They do this by dragging their anchors across the seafloor, which are heavy enough to sever the cables as they pass. Oil tanker Eagle S, Chinese-flagged vessel Yiping 3, which had a Russian captain, and the Vezhen were all implicated in cable-cutting incidents like this within 3 months of one another. Russian spy ships have also been caught mapping undersea infrastructure for possible future attacks, including one ship, the Yantar, that entered British waters twice. The Yantar was spotted loitering off the coast of Cornwall and then again in the North Sea, the location of critical cables and energy pipelines. If we go back to the tapes, we can see the UK Defence Secretary warning Parliament about these incursions.
I also wanted to confirm to the House that I authorised a Royal Navy submarine, strictly as a deterrent measure, to surface close to Yantar to make clear that we had been covertly monitoring its every move. The ship then left UK waters without further loitering and sailed down to the Mediterranean.
What Mr. Healey just revealed is that the Yantar was chased out of British waters by what we now know was a nuclear-powered submarine, an incredibly rare public disclosure of information about the UK's highly secretive nuclear fleet. He then issued a direct warning to Russia.
We see you, we know what you're doing, and we will not shy away from robust action to protect this country.
But what exactly is Russia's goal here? What is President Putin trying to achieve with these attacks? The answer lies in Russia's Soviet past. Starting at the end of World War II and lasting until the 1990s, America, its allies, and the Soviet Union were locked in a geopolitical competition known as the Cold War. Whilst these ideological enemies wielded some of the largest armies the world has ever seen, they wanted to avoid actually fighting each other because of nuclear weapons. The destructive power of these bombs was so great that it was feared a nuclear war would spell the end of life on Earth as we know it. So, they had to develop means short of all-out war that they could use against one another. The CIA referred to this as political warfare. For the KGB, it was known as active measures. These might be informational or psychological. For example, disinformation or propaganda. Propaganda was broadly divided into 3 types. First was white propaganda, where the source of the information is clearly identified. For example, a state-run TV station. Second is grey propaganda, where the source is intentionally obscured so nobody is sure where the information came from. And then there's black propaganda, where the information is falsely attributed so that people believe it came from its intended target. For example, the Soviets issued messages claiming to be from resistance movements within the Union in order to derail those movements. Or, as the name active measures suggests, they could be more, well, active. For example, compromat operations, where KGB agents built up dossiers of compromising information on politicians or other powerful elites, then used that to blackmail them. Or targeted assassinations against opponents of the regime or dissidents within. Whichever method was used, the aim was the same: to trick, intimidate, or force opponents of the Soviet Union to act in a way that weakened them, strengthened the USSR, or both. Vladimir Putin, who spent the early part of his career in the KGB, will have been well versed in active measures. He was deployed in East Berlin, the front line of the Cold War, right up until the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, and he returned home to pursue a career in politics. Now, Putin seems to be using his old Cold War training in the modern era. Whilst we can't know for certain, it seems likely the Kremlin has authorized the GRU to engage in a campaign of active measures against European nations who support Ukraine. The goal today, as it was back then, is to trick or coerce those backing Ukraine's war effort into scaling back or dropping their support. Some measures, such as the fires at the arms warehouses or the hacks on Polish trains, are designed to hamstring the war effort directly. Others work indirectly. For example, the assassination of the Russian pilot, which is intended to intimidate other Russian soldiers into continuing the fight. And some don't target the war effort at all, but is simply aimed to impose costs on Ukraine's backers or generate fear among the public, which then translates into political pressure to end the war. Think of it like mobsters running an extortion racket. Nice country you guys got there. Be a shame if something happened to it. But crucially, all these tactics are designed to work without provoking a direct war between Russia and the rest of Europe, which Moscow worries it would lose. The Kremlin must therefore toe a careful line. Ukraine's backers need to understand they're under attack, who from and why. But Russia can't directly claim credit or else risk retaliation. Again, very much like mob intimidation. Knows, but they don't know. So what, if anything, can Europe do to stop the attacks? And are they working? We went to 2 experts to find out.
Yes, my name is Maria Golubeva, and I'm the founder of the think tank Baltic Initiative on European Reform, based in Riga, and a fellow at Center for European Policy Analysis.
My name is Lukas Olejnik, and I am an independent technology consultant and a visiting senior research fellow at Department of World Studies KCL. I'm looking at cybersecurity aspects as well as data breaches and propaganda operations for quite some time now.
If we're going to work out whether Russian sabotage attacks are working, first we need to know what their goals are.
I think there are several goals. One is, of course, to test where our guard slips, so to say, where we are less protected than we would like to think. What are the vulnerabilities? So testing the limits is one. And also, of course, testing when will specific episodes be escalated to political level or not. Whether, for example, countries in the West would prefer to speak less about the cases of sabotaging the successful ones or prefer to escalate them to the political level. That's something they're trying to test and to see how it works. Another goal, of course, is the communication, or if you wish, propaganda message, showing that the West is vulnerable, that the West is not good at managing its own critical infrastructure, its own defenses in the civil sector. Russia sees that the West, or at least Western Europe, Europe in general, European Union, has been quite persistent in supporting Ukraine over those last 3 years, and they do feel that unless the pressure on policymakers from the voters becomes much more tangible in the sense of giving up this support for Ukraine, that the West will continue supporting Ukraine. And that is not something that they're happy about. So obviously that increases Ukraine's capabilities to fight Russia. So what they do is they try to undermine the credibility of Western institutions, of Western governments in the eyes of Western citizens, to make sure that sooner or later the voters might feel tired, might feel like it's been enough, and they don't like when, for example, energy companies in Germany or in France are attacked by Russian hackers. They don't like when various life-sustaining systems of our societies are compromised by their sabotage, so they expect that sooner or later this will lead to the West giving up on Ukraine.
Maria was a politician in Latvia, one of the countries targeted in these attacks. I wanted to know how Latvia deals with them.
Yes, indeed, I have been a member of parliament on National Security Committee, and I've also been a Minister of Interior, which is the equivalent of Home Secretary, for 1 year. I think the Baltic states overall are much better prepared for Russian hybrid attacks. So as a result, you don't hear so often in the media about successful attacks by Russia. What you do hear about is the undersea cables. So the undersea cables that have been cut connecting Latvia and Estonia to the Nordic countries. That has happened over the last year several times, and that is, of course, quite alarming. And since then, NATO ships had started patrolling the Baltic Sea much more assiduously, so to say, which is expected to prevent further attacks of this kind. But overall, I would say that as far as infrastructure which is situated on land is concerned, our security services and our even police, I think, are much more attuned to looking at potential risks of that kind, and is much more serious about it than I'm sorry to say, in some countries in the EU. So I think from that point of view, we have fewer really important cases like that. We have had some cases like in Lithuania, somebody set fire to an IKEA shop, and basically, apparently, this was for symbolic reasons of IKEA warehouse or shop being blue and yellow, like the Ukrainian flag. So sometimes you have very, very strange cases of sabotage, to be quite honest. But I think that overall, just because the Baltics are more watchful and more aware, because proximity makes you more aware of the threat, we have fewer successful cases by Russia sabotaging anything. I think the level of threat is considerable. I mean, I would be very much against downplaying the seriousness of these attacks just because there have not been so many terribly successful ones yet. Russian defense and attack system, so to say, is very multifaceted. There are very many different groups and collectives, private actors basically, working in concert with the state actors. Lots of initiatives. So they're prodding and trying and checking and testing. And I think some of them might be pretty helpless at doing that, but others might be not at all helpless. Some are from very well-resourced state units.
Next, I wanted to know whether Russia's attacks are achieving its aims. Before we hear from Łukasz, he's coping with hearing loss, so bear that in mind as you listen.
Assuming that the goal was the paralysis of support to Ukraine, then no, the attacks weren't successful because the support is still maintained. However, when it comes to creating a fair discontent, perhaps including some lines of discussion on the political agenda or media agenda in Western Europe, then indeed some topics did emerge and enter the debate, and that is precisely the issue, because let me just focus on information operations and propaganda. Now, people over focus on sending individual messages like let's say fake news, fake message, fake tweet, or the message on X platform now, and they too often overhype or freak out that, oh wow, there were several pages on Facebook that were spreading some falsified or disinformation content. But what is really the problem is the long-term operation, and this one is targeting the cognitive domain. So there are plenty of operations happening in the long term, and the long-term impact is something that is actually probably the goal. That was always the goal, at least of the Soviet secret services, and actually it is well known that long-term interactions and influence is something that is the actual goal of information operations and not the isolated cases. So let's think of it as a long-term game. So narratives are quite a complex thing as well, because usually you have to simplify, we consider a totally polarized society, so we just have two large groups, and to make it as simple, they oppose each other in various ways, for example, ideologically, or when it comes to aspects of economy, or for example, the support of Ukraine. So the way it works is that you do not, as an information operator or propagandist or operator in information warfare tasked with exerting influence on a state, you do not support the only one side. You played both sides. You just fueled the discontent. So it's not like they have opinions, like they support a candidate. They support everyone. They don't have opinions in local domestic matters when it comes to UK or Germany or France. It's their job. It's their job to influence the public opinion and societies. So they funnel various narratives, sometimes completely crazy, like flat earthers or other conspiracy theories. That's because there are audiences which may be prone to pick up those messages, because it's also quite well known in propaganda studies that it's really difficult and expensive to create a topic out of scratch. It's much better to subscribe to existing narratives or discussions already on the social, general public agenda or opinion.
Last, I wanted to know if Europe is doing anything to stop these attacks.
When it comes to cyber attacks, there are frameworks, legal and political tools that may be used, like for example naming and shaming, about explaining what is happening and who is driving that. There are no such legal or political tools when it comes to, let's say, those hybrid operations like sabotage operations. So this is something that the European Union and the UK currently lack. There are messaging, but there are no structural approaches here. And this is perhaps due to the fact that there are already structured collaboration when it comes to exchanging information about cyber threats. And perhaps it would be better if there could be some kind of frameworks for closer intelligence collaboration, like the real-time exchange of threat information about some kind of data of the kind, because there are plenty of units interested in sowing chaos in Europe, and sooner or later the Western Europe, European Union and the UK will really need to be serious about it, because it's happening and it's happening now. So this is a question that should be asked to policymakers.
Is hitting back at Russia an option?
That's a thought that one hears increasingly these days. I think it's not the first time I hear this question, and I have heard opinions from experts across the whole spectrum of, political scientists, security analysts, whoever, who tend to agree that we might actually be doing more in terms of hitting back, not just in terms of trying to be more prepared or protect our critical infrastructure. The question is how and in what form, and who would be again making those decisions. I think in some countries the politicians and the public administration, especially the security services, are themselves quite ready probably for trying something like that, and in other countries they are probably much more cautious. So again, I think the devil is in the detail.
That's where this tape stops, but we'll be back soon to play you through another piece of Geopolitics on Tape.